we have some idea of what the workflow for calculating heat transfer coefficients and heat transfer rates past systems that can be described as a flow past a flat plate. Given that we have this notion of how to do this, it makes sense for us to try to consider how that idea, that workflow, changes as we upgrade into more complicated geometry. And the natural next step in terms of complicated geometry is to consider cylindrical or spherical geometries, systems that can be described as a cylinder or a sphere that are embedded inside of some kind of like semi-infinite flow, right? And so the kind of geometries that we're looking at, what I like to call circular systems, right, because they can be drawn as a circle in the same diagram, is the following. We have some cylinder or a sphere with diameter d that is embedded inside of this uniform flow, or at least uniform far from the cylinder or sphere. That speed, that flow speed, is u infinity. The surface temperature of the object, the cylinder or the sphere, is Ts, and then that background temperature, right, the temperature of the fluid very, very far away from the object, is T infinity. And the fluid, just like in the previous examples, has a bunch of important material properties that are relevant for the study of heat transfer past the object. The mass density, the specific heat capacity, the dynamic viscosity, and the thermal conductivity, right? So this setup is very, very familiar in the sense that it is roughly the same in terms of the parameters associated with the heat transfer or the heat transfer phenomena that occurs in the system. The parameters are almost the same. The only thing that's different is that now the length scale that we use is no longer the length of a flat plate or even any kind of local measure of, how far we are from the leading edge of the object. Now the only length scale that we're using is the diameter. And because the only length scale that we use is the diameter for these sorts of systems, because we're not considering any kind of like specific coordinate or location, from, say, the leading edge or whatever, then we can't do local analyses of heat transfer in these systems, all right? We can no longer determine what the local heat transfer coefficient is, say, on the top edge or the front edge or the back edge, because we no longer have a parameter that tells us what the front edge or the back edge or the top edge is, okay? And so all of the correlations that we take a look at in these sort of circular systems, they're always for average heat transfer coefficients, and they're always for net heat transfer rates, all right? So we no longer have to distinguish between local and average correlations. In fact, we no longer have to really distinguish between correlations at all, at least not at the level of this course, because not only do we lose resolution from the perspective of local versus average, but we also lose resolution from the perspective of laminar versus turbulent or fully laminar versus mixed. And the reason that that happens isn't because turbulence doesn't occur in these sorts of systems. In fact, it certainly does. The reason that we don't necessarily consider it is because the correlations that we construct for systems that are cylindrical or spherical are sufficiently complex that they can accommodate both the laminar and the turbulent phenomena and the way that they affect heat transfer into a single empirical correlation, which wasn't the case when we were talking about flow past flat plates. And so, again, it's not necessarily that laminar versus turbulent flow in the system doesn't matter. It will, in fact, affect the heat transfer. It's just that we can account for both of those different behaviors inside of the same correlation. And so, ultimately, the workflow for cylindrical and spherical systems is actually far simpler in the sense that we don't even have to necessarily distinguish between different correlations. We have a perfectly practical single correlation that we can use. Again, at the level of undergraduate heat transfer, we have a single correlation for each kind of geometry that we can use to find a Nusselt number. And so, is there a significant difference in the workflow? Well, not really. There's one key thing, but we'll talk about that at the end of the lecture. The idea is still the same. We have these material properties. We want to find a Prandtl number or a representative Prandtl number PR. We also want to find a Reynolds number. The Reynolds number that we find for this particular system is now going to be based not on a plate length L or a distance from leading edge coordinate x, it's now going to be based off this diameter. And so the Reynolds numbers that we calculate, which you can see illustrated with the little d subscript to highlight that, the Reynolds number we calculate is now using the diameter as the length scale. All right, and this is important for cylindrical systems for you not to get confused. Some people like to really use the cylinder length. That's not what we use for these sorts of correlations. It's always the diameter. Okay? We find the Prandtl number, we find a Reynolds number, and then we look up a correlation like the ones that are shown here that tell us what the Nusselt number is. Once again, also for calculating Nusselt numbers, the process is exactly the same. The difference is that the length scale is once again a diameter, but the definition of a Nusselt number, the generic idea that it's just h times, the length scale, the diameter, divided by k, is exactly the same as we saw in flow past flat plates. There isn't necessarily anything physical that's going on in terms of the description, right? The fact that this is a half or a third doesn't really matter. All of this is just a complicated fit to decades of data that have been taken to try to understand how heat transfer occurs in these particular systems. But something interesting happens in the correlation for the sphere. And this is something that happens whenever you have a geometry that's complex enough. So this doesn't just happen for spheres. It isn't unique to them. Whenever you have a three-dimensional object that's sufficiently complex, you're going to start to see something interesting occur. And you can spot it from the way that the equation is set up. What is that ratio right there? Right? So here's an interesting thing, something that we talked about briefly when discussing flow past flat plates, but not something we really dwelt on, okay, which is that whenever I'm doing my analysis, I have to ask myself, well, there are these material properties. Those material properties are a function of temperature. And so if I tried to evaluate what these were at the surface of the sphere, right, at temperature Ts, it might be the case that the value of these things at Ts and the value of these things all the way, away from the sphere at T infinity are different. And so in flow past flat plates, the compromise that we did, right, when faced with that kind of situation, was that we simply said, oh, well, let's just, if we can, calculate the average of those two temperatures. If we have access, if we know what those temperatures are, let's calculate the average of those things, of those two temperatures, and then evaluate the material properties at that average temperature. And when it comes to analyzing behavior in a cylinder, we do the exact same thing, right? We evaluate the Prandtl number, the material properties that give us the Prandtl number, and that by extension give us the Reynolds number. We evaluate all of those things at this kind of average temperature, the average of the surface and the ambient. For a sphere, however, it turns out that we need to consider not just the material properties at a film temperature, which is the colloquial name for this kind of average temperature. We actually need to consider them both far away, right, at T infinity, and also up close at the surface of the sphere. That's what this notation over here means. Mu infinity means that we are plugging in the dynamic viscosity far away from the sphere, and mu s means that we're plugging in the dynamic viscosity close to the sphere. And so for spherical correlations, rather than evaluating the Prandtl number and the material properties that give you the Prandtl number at this average temperature, this correlation specifically is designed to take in material properties defined at this ambient temperature T infinity, okay, with the exception, of course, of this. So that seems like a pretty easy fix, right? So what's so weird about it? Well, remember the way that we set up this process in the first place, okay? The entire idea had been that we had a couple of, I guess you could say, experimental or physical parameters that uniquely define the behavior of the system, at least from the perspective of heat transfer. The fact that if I take any other cylinder and any other fluid and any other physical setup, and as long as I can represent it in the exact same way with the exact same parameter values, the behavior should be the same. And so therefore I can start the engine of constructing non-dimensional correlations, right? Of finding how I can relate those parameters to each other in the simplest way possible, at least for an experimentalist, by, starting to divide by dimensional quantities and then just say, well, we get a Nusselt number, a Reynolds number, and a Prandtl number, and then those things have to be functions of each other. That was sort of the engine. But what happens when these things vary significantly between the temperature at the surface of the object and in the background, right? Well, consider the following, right? So we had defined, for the purposes of simple calculations, we had said, the Reynolds number is just equal to rho u infinity times the diameter divided by mu, at least for cylindrical systems, right? For cylindrical systems, this mu is this kind of mu evaluated at the average of these two things. But if we consider the fact that these things actually change, right, now we have to consider the fact that we can construct a Reynolds number, which I can call Re infinity, using the dynamic viscosity all the way out here, and that I can also construct a Reynolds number, which I'll call the surface Reynolds number, using the dynamic viscosity on the surface. And of course, using the density at the surface as well, okay? And the issue with this is that because the temperature varies continuously as we move from the surface of this cylinder or sphere all the way out into, infinity, right, and further and further away from the object, there are an infinite number of dimensionless parameters, an infinite number of Reynolds numbers that I can construct, all of them using material properties at every point between the surface and infinity, right? For all of the temperatures that I can experience between Ts and T infinity. And so what eventually starts to occur is what I like to call a dimensional crisis, which is that the number of dimensionless parameters that show up potentially in our correlations balloons up to infinity. Because not only do we have to consider, right, like what is the Reynolds number and the Prandtl number, at the temperature halfway between these two, but we have to consider the Reynolds number and the Prandtl number everywhere in between for all of those different temperatures. And if that's the case, it becomes impossible to create an experimental paradigm where we find these correlations precisely, because of the fact that now there's an infinite number of things that the Nusselt number depends on. And so when it comes to the case of a sphere, we have at least a little bit of resolution in the sense that adding this dimensionless parameter here, this ratio of dynamic viscosities, is enough to kind of stem the crisis. This is adding in this extra dimensionless parameter, this single dimensionless parameter, is enough to be able to get a prediction that is sufficiently accurate. But as you start getting more and more complex geometries, you can imagine that we are now running into a situation where suddenly, maybe we have to start including more and more ratios. We have to start including more and more different Reynolds numbers and Prandtl numbers. And this is not something that you usually see very often in undergraduate courses because, again, the correlations become far too complex to be able to provide in an exam. But it is nevertheless useful because it tells us something very important about the setup associated with these sorts of systems. And that is simply the fact that we created everything here on this assumption that we have these kind of material properties, which we had derived as being proportionality ratios, right? Or at least most of them are, right? The specific heat capacity and the thermal conductivity, we've spent time showing that these are basically just ratios, or proportionality constants, I should say. And those proportionality constants absorb all of the physics that we didn't bother to actually care about when we started setting up the theory of heat transfer. Because they absorb all the physics, now these things are a function of basically everything in the system, including the temperature. And if we assume that these things are, single numbers, then we have to kind of assume that we're operating at a specific temperature, that there's a specific, value of the temperature at which we can analyze these things. But in order for heat transfer to occur, there has to be a temperature imbalance. That was the whole thesis of the theory of heat transfer, or at least the theory of the field of study of heat transfer. And so there's this fundamental paradox of this idea that we operate at a specific temperature, that we define material properties at a specific temperature, but that heat transfer never occurs at a specific temperature. This paradox leads into this sort of dimensional crisis of having an infinite number of dimensionless parameters that we would have to theoretically find to get a Nusselt number. For geometries that are simple, planar systems, cylindrical systems, the effect of those other numbers is sufficiently small that we don't have to care about them in the correlations. So we just ignore them, they don't show up. For complicated flows like flow past the sphere, it turns out that we do have to care about them, or at least we have to care about one of them. And you can imagine that as we start, if we created correlations that were more and more complex for more and more specialized geometry, that more and more dimensionless parameters would show up. Okay? And so once again, the reason that I spent so much time talking about this kind of dimensional crisis is just because of the fact that it tells us something philosophically about the idea via which we construct a theory of heat transfer, right? About how valid this process of making empirical correlations for a given system is. But now that we've talked about this, it now makes sense for us to transition into one final type of heat transfer problem, one that doesn't necessarily involve flow past an object, but flow within an object, which is perhaps unsurprisingly referred to as internal flow. And we will take a look at what the workflow and what the analysis for internal flow systems are in the next lecture.